So the last part of your smorgasbord of some issues for debate is around inequalities in education. And for this 10 minutes, I'm a professor of education at the Manchester Institute of Education. And I want to start with just a general caveat that all of what I'm going to say is about test and exam results. At the Manchester Institute of Education, it would be hard to find a colleague who thinks that that defines education. And particularly in relation to this issue, we tend to work really with a concept of equity in education, which encompasses broader ideas of fair treatment, recognition and equality of experience, as well as gaps in test scores, and with an idea of education that encompasses a lot more than cognitive attainments. And in fact, I think a lot of our research demonstrates that practices which emphasise credentials at all costs can result in very marginalising and disengaging experiences of education, especially for people from underprivileged groups. But nevertheless, in all else that's been said, and we see it in health, as employment, incomes and so on, educational outcomes are very important. So it's still important to talk about them. So this is my justification for only talking about them in the next few minutes. And the other thing I just want to say is it's really unusual these days to see any data about education brought together at Greater Manchester level, because of course the combined authority has no powers over the school system. And that, I think, is a really big issue in itself if we're thinking about what the Greater Manchester economy and inequalities and social justice. But we've got no kind of conurbation-wide way of thinking about our education system. And it's important also to look across the board here, because we've got such a wide variety of educational experiences within Greater Manchester. I just wanted to put this up. This is the characteristics of the cohort of children who were at the end of primary school in 2014, so they're now in year 8. But this map looks pretty much the same for older and younger cohorts. The shading underneath here shows the level of free school meals, nearly double the national average in Manchester, also very high in Salford and Oldham, but below the national average in some outer areas, Trafford, Stockport and Bury and so on. And these pie charts just show the ethnic mix, just with very broad categories, which are extremely problematic because they're hiding more than they are revealing, really. But again, very different educational issues, challenges and experience. So Wigan, an almost entirely white school population. Manchester, very much more diverse, the only borough with a substantial black school population, large Asian populations in Manchester, Oldham, Rochdale, also Bury, Bolton rather. Really kind of different issues and challenges in delivering an equitable education in different places. And of course, very different school systems. So here we go with Trafford again, selective grammar schools. But there are some very interesting differences that emerged in school reform. So if Bury has no academies, for example, whereas Manchester and Salford have gone over to almost entirely academised system. So in terms of how we pull the levers around educational inequalities, things are very different across the conurbation. So looking just at some results then. Well, the first thing to note is that inequalities in attainment appear very young and are very wide. So this graph shows assessments in the early years. Now, these are not just, thank goodness, test results. There are 4 dimensions here, including physical development, communication and language, literacy, maths, and personal, social and emotional development. So these sticks these together. And the lines here show the England figures, and the bars are the Greater Manchester figures. The blue bars are the children who are not eligible for free school meals. And the red are children who are eligible for free school meals. So even at 5, but firstly, I mean, both Greater Manchester bars circled here are slightly below the national average. But the gaps are huge, so 20 percentage points across Greater Manchester as a whole, but ranging from 10 percentage points in Manchester City to 29 in Wigan. So already we've got very early signs of differential life chances. By the time we get to GCSE, the gaps are much larger, 28 percentage points overall between the red and the blue. And you can see that Manchester, which was 10 percentage points on the previous graph by GCSE, this is 21 percentage points. Much bigger gaps in some boroughs, and some very striking differences between boroughs. So I've circled Stockport and Trafford, which you recall both have very low levels of free school meals. But in Trafford, the children although there's a huge gap, the children on free school meals in Trafford are achieving slightly more than other children on free school meals in the country as a whole. Whereas in Stockport, an even huger gap, and the red bar is sat some way below even the national average for children on free school meals. I should say these aren't the same children that I'm tracking from early years to GCSE. These are snapshots of the cohorts, but other research nationally shows this same picture, that the gap widens as children move through school, which is exactly the opposite of what we should be hoping for from an equitable education system. And on the whole, and I don't have time to unpack this more, on the whole, progress in closing these gaps has been very low, even over the period since the mid-2000s, when first the Labour government and then the coalition government with its pupil premium started to put significant investment specifically into closing those gaps. We've made virtually no progress on the 5 A star to C, including English and maths, measure in closing the free school meal gap. So business as usual isn't going to make this graph look any different. Interestingly, closing gaps between ethnic groups, progress has been more substantial. I just wanted to show a little bit of these. I've just picked the 5 boroughs with the largest minority ethnic school populations. And again, using these, ridiculously wide categories for the sake of simplicity and only looking at 1 year, there are some interesting differences here. So in Manchester, Bolton, and Trafford, you get a familiar picture nationally that Asian children on average do better than other ethnic groups, but there are differences within that Asian categorisation. But this isn't the case in some boroughs. For example, in Oldham and Rochdale, Asian children are slightly below some of the groups, and there are sizable gaps between black pupils and others, especially in some boroughs. Look at the Trafford bar particularly. So still some work to do there, although progress has been a bit better there than on free school meals. And then finally, I just wanted to look at entry to university, because both social and ethnic and economic differences, combine to create these, combine into educational chances overall. And here we see very substantial differences. This is by parliamentary constituency, should be of interest to some MPs in Greater Manchester. I would have thought nearly double the proportion of children going to university in wealthy outer suburbs such as Cheadle, Altrincham, Sale West and Bury North than in central and eastern areas, parts of Manchester and into Tameside, where we've got around about a fifth of young people going on to university, compared with 40 to 50% in the outer suburbs. And this more or less maps onto, this is the map of deprivation in Greater Manchester as a whole. And if you look for the big red areas, these are the most deprived areas in Greater Manchester. They're also the big red areas on this map. But there are interesting areas like parts of Rochdale and Bolton, which have very high levels of deprivation but don't show up on this map. Obviously, we've got differences of scale here, but it does suggest that despite the high levels of deprivation, some young people are going on to university more than you'd expect in a way, given the pattern in in other parts there. I know Naomi has done some work on differential rates of access to, and she's here somewhere, of entry to university and comparing cities across the UK. And this pattern also emerges that with the same sort of socio-economic composition, you get higher rates in some areas than others. So I just wanted to make a couple of concluding comments, really. So what comes out of this very scratch-the-surface look at education inequalities, the gaps are extremely wide and they're persistent. So I think it's hard to imagine a much more equal city in the future, given these kind of patterns, given what we know. I think the difference between going to university and not adds up to something like £200,000 over your earning career or something like that. So there are substantial differences in education leading to higher income, to better health, to chances of employment and so on. So in the way this underpins a lot of the rest of the stuff that we're talking about. And changing these patterns, this is the other thing that sort of strikes me, will require a much, much more ambitious agenda for social and economic transformation than the current or recent policies that we've got, which are to add on some extra resources to schools in poorer neighbourhoods. Governments have tried this and it's not making any impact on the problem. And policies have got to go well beyond school policies. Generations of educational research shows that about 85% of the difference between school, socioeconomic attainment gaps in schools has got nothing. 85% of it is nothing to do with the school. 15% of it is to do with the school. So schools can do something, but if we want to change these patterns, we need to be thinking much more fundamentally and about holistic and joined up policies. So education isn't going to change through education policy. And the final point is that while we need this bigger and more transformational agenda joining up lots of different services and areas, governance responsibilities for education are just becoming more fragmented by the moment. So nothing at Greater Manchester level, declining role of local authorities and increasing emphasis on school autonomy. So we don't have the tools at the moment to do the transformational work that would be needed to change this picture. So I won't go as far as curse or doomed. Well, I think this is some stark problems to start off with. Okay, thank you.